Our scripture lesson this morning comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 15 through 35. Jesus talks to us about forgiveness. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him, and as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, Have patience with me, I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him by the throat, he said, Pay what you owe. Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, Have patience with me, I will pay you. But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Will you join me in prayer? God, we come to this place, a people who are broken. We are broken and hurting in so many ways this morning, and we lay all of those things open and bare to you. Shine light into the broken places in our hearts and in our souls, and show us how to find the way back. Show us how to open ourselves up to light in those places again. We ask that you open us up to your words today, that you fill us up, and that you send us out to be your people in this world. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our God. Amen. This is a complicated passage, and we're going to come back to parts of it later this summer, because this is like a year's worth of sermons in about 20 texts, right? And so I'm just taking a little bit. We're just going to talk about the first part of what Liz read, that part where we talked about Jesus' advice to the church. The early church was not devoid of conflict. The early church, in fact, was a hotbed of conflict because they had a whole bunch of people who didn't really know what they were doing and were only brought together because of their faith in God. And they had different traditions and preferences. They had different ideas about what this new church was going to be, and they had long-held grudges and ethnic strife. And so Jesus sits down and he tells his people a story. He tells his people a practical solution that you could find in every business journal that you open. Every single one of them, if you go to the store and buy a conflict management book, it's going to be this chapter of Matthew. They're going to dress it up in science words and make it sound like they've discovered something new. Those of you who have read these management books know what I'm talking about. But it's just this. It's just Matthew 18. And so I struggled a little bit with this sermon as I was trying to put it together, because what do you say that's new about this? And I was sitting at the breakfast table this morning watching my children. And I don't know if other parents do this, but every once in a while I just like to sit and watch my children, to observe them in their natural habitat when they don't think anybody is paying any attention to them. I get busy with the details. There's a lot of details in our lives. There's a lot of places to be and places to go. And I spend more time than I had imagined on spelling homework and creating worksheets and other things. I forget sometimes just to see them. And so on top of that, my star word this year was play, which was a clear sign from God to take a deep breath from all the stuff in my life and just to sit down and enjoy. That it's okay for the laundry to sit and unfolded in a basket for a few days. The clothes will still be clean. And they can get clothes out of a basket as easily as they can get it out of the drawer. Probably easier because it's in the right place. My son wanting to play basketball or baseball with me is only going to last another handful of years. And so I'm trying to take those moments when they come. Anyway, I was watching them and thinking about how just totally different they are in every possible way. They all come equipped theoretically with the same genetic code. I know there are math and science nerds who will be able to quote to me the exact probability of different genetic alignments based on 4 simple genetic options. But they share the same base, the same parents, the same house. But they are different. I don't think that's unusual to my family. I look at my siblings, one older, one younger. We all share theoretically the same genetic code. I don't have proof of that. They had the same parents, went mostly to the same schools, and yet we couldn't be more different adults if we'd set out on that life plan. Except maybe we're more similar than we'd like to admit. I mean, now my sister, she's her own special little butterfly, but my brother is very, very different from me. He's so different. I mean, he's a Presbyterian pastor who's a history nerd and likes to read, and he studies and learns new things, and he talks a little bit too loud and too fast, and he watches baseball fanatically, and he raises chickens, and he has too many children, and he lives in a manse, and he drives a van, and he went to seminary in Pittsburgh, but other than that, we're totally different. I mean, he's a Pirates fan, for God's sake. That's an unforgivable sin. Now, there are moments of blissful joy when everyone in our family is laughing together. We're all on the same wavelength. We're pulling the cart in the same direction. We're working as a team, and we're being present for one another and showing compassion and kindness. And then there is the rest of the time. You throw in a little bit of stress, a little bit of frustration, a misplaced toy, or a lost shoe, and all bets are off. Or if there's a clash of personalities that happens where one of us wants to read while the other wants to play, or our different viewpoints in the world show us different sides of the same coin, but we want to be right. For the other person to just admit that we're right. To just see that our window is the correct window through which to view the world, and it is. It's the correct window for you. But it isn't necessarily the correct window for them. You may be taller and they may be shorter, or you have 20/20 vision and they need goggles, or you are a Steelers fan, God bless you, and you see the world as good when the Steelers win, when the rest of the world knows that that is bad. Both are right. Well, the Ravens are worse. Both are right, both are true, both are correct windows. It's just that we're different people. We're looking through different glasses. And it turns out that most conflict happens between two people who are right. They're just different. Or actually, most conflict happens between two people who are right but the same. You know, the same but just a little bit different. We all want to avoid conflict, and even for people who have a relatively high tolerance for conflict, we try to avoid it as much as possible. because conflict is hard. It's something we don't want to engage with because conflict brings with it so many attendant side effects. There are physical ones. It can make your heart race and your palms sweat and lead you into nervousness because you aren't real sure about the outcome of the conflict. And so we avoid it, or we try to avoid it. But the truth is, conflict is not avoidable. You can try, you can push it down the road, you can, but those bits of your personality that rub against each other aren't going to change. You're not going to be able to lower someone else's window, and sometimes there's a giant ravine between the two paths you're walking down together. The conflict always starts as a little pebble that's stuck there in your shoe, or a small lone cloud which follows you ahead. You can push the conflict down the road. You can push it down the road a bit, but pretty quickly that conflict is going to gain some dirt. It's going to gather some moss. You can try to find a side path around the conflict, or you can invite someone else to carry the conflict for you, but the truth is, you cannot avoid it. It will still be there. And the longer you avoid it, or route around it, or the more you push it off onto someone else, the bigger the rock grows until it smushes all the people in its path. The root of the problem doesn't go away. The more you try to avoid it, the harder you push it away, it just gets bigger and harder to dismantle. You can dissolve a pebble with a glass of Coca-Cola. A stone requires a sledgehammer or a couple of angels. You cannot avoid conflict. You only get to choose the time and the manner in which you address the conflict, which goes to myth number 2, that conflict is always bad. It isn't bad. It's not a negative thing. Conflict is not harmful. Having disagreements with somebody else isn't bad, and it doesn't make you a bad person or mean you have an awful relationship devoid of anything good. Sometimes conflict is stressful or thorny or energy-taking, but conflict is not bad. Conflict only hurts or harms or explodes when it's been put off too long to resolve it safely. You can resolve a disagreement about the best route to take to school in the morning. You can't solve a 5-year pent-up frustration because your spouse constantly side seat drives and tells you when to brake and tells you when to brake and how to brake. And for God's sakes, can't you see the car? Don't I need to tell you about the car? I'm just going to yell about the car. And it just scares the living poop out of you, and that's why you run into the curb, right? Whew, that felt good. Every pastor I know asks the nominating committee one question. And I always framed it this way. Tell me about the last time there was a conflict in the church and what happened. Do you know what the scariest response is? Do you know what every pastor wants to avoid, what every pastor immediately turns away from? The scariest possible answer to is there conflict in your church question is, we don't have any conflict. We don't have any conflict. Everybody gets along. We all love each other all the time. And that is so scary because the reality is that, yes, there is. Right? Of course there's conflict. There's 5 people in my family, and if we make it through the whole day without conflict, I write it down on the calendar, right? There is 80 people in this room-ish. There's some more online. There is no possible way that you're not mad at somebody in this room right now. And have disagreements with them, right? It's not bad. It's just that you're a person and they're a person and everybody's broken, right? You cannot put 80 people together in a room and not have disagreements and rubbing up against each other, and somewhere along the line somebody broke a casserole dish. There are so many ways that we get mixed up with one another, and some of us are windows and some of us are doors, and that is always going to create conflict. And churches without conflict are dead or on their way to dying. Churches where everybody agrees is not healthy or thriving because that means that everybody in the church agrees with each other already and everybody's exactly the same. Churches where there is some level of conflict are healthy and thriving because it means that the Spirit is moving in the church. It means people are doing ministry together. And that's where Jesus shows up, because there are all kinds of different people and opinions and thoughts and feelings, and people care. They're invested in one another. Churches without healthy conflict are dead or dying. Healthy conflict. And so Jesus helpfully lays out for us in Matthew 18 what healthy conflict looks like. The first step is recognizing that there is conflict in the first place. Yes, we have conflict, right? There is something which needs to be addressed. We are awfully good at pretending that everything is fine. It is a honed part of our conflict avoidance system. We're awfully good at dehumanizing one another, too. Awfully good at child of Godding another person. It's so much easier to label each other as mean or uncaring or arrogant or loud or hard-headed or stubborn or stuck in their ways or too eager for change or a loudmouth, hard-charging son of a gun who doesn't love anyone but themselves. That is so easy to do. But the truth is, the other person just sees the world differently than you do. And in most cases, they aren't a bad person. They just like reading books, and you like watching TV, and that is a resolvable problem if we just talk about it. The other person isn't trying to hurt you or harm you or defeat you or keep you down. They just don't know what's in your heart because you haven't shared it with them in most cases. That's why Jesus tells us that the first step in directing conflict is talking to another person, directly with the other person who laid down that stumbling block in the first place. We tend to try to go around or behind each other, or we try to get other people to pick up the rock and throw it for us, but that only deepens and broadens the divide between the two people. Because now, instead of two people involved who need to resolve an issue, there are three people involved who are now mad at each other. And when you start adding a third person, they're going to find another thing to be mad about, right? And instead of a small pebble which easily is dissolved or thrown off the cliff into the ravine below, now you have a boulder which causes an avalanche. And so Jesus tells us the ultimate sign of respect for another member of your faith community is to speak directly to them, to see them as a child of God who is equally beloved to you, and to try to resolve the issue at hand before it builds up and spreads and destroys. This conversation will be hard and hurtful sometimes, but only if you go into it trying to be right. If you go into that conversation with another person trying to show them how right you are, that's only going to make it worse. So if you go into that conversation with both of you seeing each other as child of God, interested in hearing the truth of their stories, then that conflict does not have to be destructive. Paul tells the people of Corinth that their problems would be resolved if they'd enter into conversation with each other with humility, with the idea of seeing and discovering another person's point of view. In 1 Corinthians 8, we hear them arguing about if they can eat meat dedicated to idols, and Paul's response is that grace allows you to see through another person's eyes, and maybe it's not about the meat, but about honoring how difficult the other person's path might be. Talk to the person. Talk to them. Learn their point of view. Listen to their story and their reasoning. You may not agree with it ever, but the relationship will be stronger. It will be stronger. I promise it will. You may have to agree to disagree. You may have to agree that your way and their way are never going to mesh. You may have to decide that you are going to put what you are interested in to the side because you see how important it is to another person. It may cost you something, but your relationship with them will be stronger in the long run. And do it now. Don't wait. Don't wait 6 weeks, don't wait 6 months, don't wait 6 years to bring it up. Do it now when you can talk about your experiences together, when you can listen to the other person's version of the story, and before the conflict has caused so much damage in your relationship that it is not solvable. Do it now. Because the second part of that story that Jesus says is where 2 or 3 are gathered, then I am there with you. Which means that that difficult conversation is not happening between 2 people. It's happening between 3, and one of those loves both of you very much. Jesus is in the middle of that conversation with us when we enter into it with a desire to see each other as children of God. Jesus holds our hands and keeps our tempers in check and opens our ears to hear one another. You know that old joke, what happens when you get 2 Presbyterians in a room? You know this one? You get 3 opinions, right? I think one of those is Jesus's. The whole point is that when we get together, we can see a possibility, a range of possibilities, that neither one of you may have been right in the first place. Or, even better, you were both right and now you've come up with an even better solution. Talk to the person. Talk to them. Jesus is going to be there to walk along with you in that discussion, to open your ears and your hearts, to remind you that maybe you weren't as right as you thought you were, and what you really need to say is, I'm sorry. Either way, you'll get a glimpse out of the other person's window. You'll see the world as they see it, and you might actually see Jesus isn't inside anyway. He's out in the yard ready to go, waiting for you to team up and put this aside and get stronger together and to get out of the house. The truth is we're going to bump up against each other when we walk together in life, but when we share what's in our hearts with the person who keeps stepping on that, and if that person is open and available to hear your story and your point of view, when you take that brave and courageous act of naming and sharing your perspective with someone else, when we pull a stool over or kneel down to see the world as our fellow children see it, then we can frame our experience of the world a little differently. Nobody is right. Nobody is wrong. Unless, of course, they're arguing about a broken casserole dish, then somebody's definitely wrong. Talk. Listen. Listen more than you talk. Learn a little bit about each other and see if maybe the world doesn't open up with new possibilities for both of you. You can't avoid it. You only get to choose whether it's healthy or destructive. God bless.